This pressure has prompted Postmaster General Louis DeJoy to agree to testify before both the House of Representatives as well as the U.S. Senate within the next week. Join us now to discuss that and much more. Representative John Garamendi, the congressman, of course, is a Democrat from the great state of California. Congressman Garamendi, very much appreciate you taking a few minutes for us. All right, you've got DeJoy coming to the Hill both Friday as well as Monday. What do you need to hear from the somewhat beleaguered Postmaster General?
He needs to be seriously reprimanded. He needs to be seriously put in his place. The U.S. Postal Service is absolutely essential not only for this election, but also essential for everything we do in America. We get our bills, we pay our bills, we get our prescriptions, we order our prescriptions, all of these things. We get packages from businesses that have no way of having people stop by their business. Instead, they're doing it virtually. The post office is absolutely essential, and this man has done everything he could possibly do in his 2.5 months in office to destroy the credibility, the efficiency, and the effectiveness of the post office. He needs to be jumped on, and he needs to replace, rebuild, put back in place those things necessary to create an efficient, effective postal service in the run-up to this election.
Now, Congressman, to clarify, you say he needs to be, quote unquote, jumped on. He needs to be reprimanded. Your colleague in the House from California, Ro Khanna, told me yesterday that's not far enough. He needs to resign. Ro Khanna even floating the potential of criminality facing Mr. DeJoy as well as the Board of Governors. Are you at the point where you're prepared to call for Mr. DeJoy also, like some of your Democratic colleagues, to now resign?
Certainly, he never should have been appointed. The president had a plan way back in the spring that he was going to disrupt the election in any way possible to keep Americans from voting. That was his plan. Part of that plan is now in place. He was going to appoint a postmaster general that would destroy the effectiveness and the efficiency of the Postal Service. Should DeJoy resign, he shouldn't be there. And that's a resignation. But I'm concerned. If he goes, then which kind of sycophant is going to replace him? Who will the president put in place? What I want is DeJoy to immediately put back in place those key personnel that he moved out of their office, forced them into other roles, put back in place the sorting machines, put those little blue boxes back in place. And if he can't hire somebody to do it, he ought to get his butt out there and do it himself.
Now, Congressman Garamendi, a short time before we came on the air live with you here, sir, Mr. DeJoy did say he's basically looking to suspend some of these changes. I'm curious if you've gotten the opportunity to read up on that news just breaking within the last hour and what you make of the timing, considering the fact that Mr. DeJoy is due in front of the Senate panel in just a few days' time.
Not enough. Keep in mind, he's already done the destruction. He's already eliminated overtime. He's already prohibited the mail carriers from doing their full routes, whatever time it took. He's also taken out those sorting machines. He's also removed all those blue boxes. Can he do more? Yes. Has he promised not to do more? Good. But what is he going to do about rebuilding, about reestablishing, about putting back in place what he has already destroyed? That's the critical issue going forward, both ways. Get it done, Mr. DeJoy, or get out of there and get somebody in there that's going to do it.
I mean, DeJoy is certainly someone who was not known to the American people even just 2 months' time ago or so, but he is facing new waves of allegations of impropriety. We know that DeJoy owns at least $25 million in XPO Logistics stock. That's, of course, DeJoy's former company. We also know he owns stock options of Amazon. That would allow him to purchase shares of Amazon at a far lower rate than most traders, most investors out there. What does that tell you with regards to his previous holdings, with regards to his new role as Postmaster General?
It would simply be the continuation of the corruption of the Trump administration. Consider for a moment the number of people that have been resigned, put in jail, under trial. There has never been a more corrupt administration than the Trump administration. The corruption begins right at the top with the president. Doesn't surprise me at all that DeJoy joins in that long list of corrupt officials that Trump has put in place. And he ought to be held accountable. And probably one more reason, not probably, certainly one more reason that he ought not be there at all.
Is the president trying to steal the election, Congressman?
Yes, no doubt about it. You take a look, and he's not alone in this. All across this country, Republican, excuse me, all across this country, Republican governors, Republican secretaries of state, and down into the county have been limiting access to voting, removing precincts, excuse me, setting up various ways in which people are prohibited or at least retarded from voting. And the mail program, the vote by mail, is one more thing. The president has been working for months to denigrate, to cause Americans to not believe in voting by mail, even though the president himself intends to vote by mail. But this is all a pattern. This is a pattern to reduce the number of people voting in America so that he can illegitimately win an election. It isn't going to happen. The American public isn't going to put up with it. The American public is going to stand up and say, enough, Mr. Trump. You cannot steal this election. Open the polling booths, put the precincts back in place, give us the right to vote. And if you don't, we're going to vote you out of office regardless.
The president is certainly trying to cast doubt on the integrity of the 2020 election. Just this morning here, Congressman Garamendi, President Trump telling reporters that we may have to do the election over again due to a surge in mail-in voting. He has previously said, hey, we may never know who actually won the 2020 election. How concerned are you, sir, that if Donald Trump loses, that perhaps for the first time in American history, we may not actually have the all-important peaceful transition of power?
Every American must be concerned about the very future of our democracy. This president intends to be a dictator. He said he doesn't want to ever leave office. He ought to be president for life, and he's doing his very level best to do that. There is no reason, there's no evidence, there's absolutely no history of fraud in mail-in voting. It's been going on in California for decades. Oregon essentially has only mail-in voting. Other states are going to be using it extensively. What is fraudulent is the president's effort to try to persuade Americans not to vote. He's basically telling them, go out there in the midst of this pandemic and stand in line. Stand in line. Run the risk of an infection. That's what he says. Does he have the guts? Does he have the courage to go stand in line himself? He does not. But he wants every American to do that. He doesn't want Americans to do precisely what he is doing, which is to vote by mail. So, Mr. President, get out of the way. Stop telling Americans that voting by mail is fraudulent. It is not. It is secure. There is no evidence of fraud. What there is evidence of is that the president is trying to manipulate the American mind into thinking that their vote by mail is not correct, not going to happen, will not be counted. One more thing. The American public should keep in mind that we have always had votes and vote counting that extends days and even months beyond the actual election day. This happened in 2000. If you remember the Gore-Bush, that extended into December before it was ultimately decided by the Supreme Court. In a 5-4 vote, Bush won on 5 votes in the Supreme Court. We also know that even this year, in elections in New York, no evidence of fraud, but it takes a long time to count the mail-in votes. So for Americans, there's a message. Do not believe the president on November 4th when he claims victory. Believe that there are millions, tens of millions of votes that have not yet been counted. These are the mail-in votes that have legitimately, properly, honestly, and correctly been submitted, and they will be counted. Every vote counts.
Well, Congressman, we certainly know it's not going to really be an election night in the traditional sense. I think most Americans are now starting to wake up to the realization it's going to be much more like an election month, a series of weeks as votes continue to be very carefully counted. 77 days to go. Congressman John Garamendi, always welcome here on Cheddar to make the case. Thanks a lot for taking the time. Brad Smith, my good friend, I'll now toss things back